The child, surrounded by praises to a Lord he could not see, in awe and wonder, looking up from towering pews and giants who stand oblivious to his presence. His little feet ran. This little lot of mine loudly rang suddenly from the sanctuary. Around the altar, his mother flushed red, pulled him from his joy, shamed and flicked behind the towering pew. I'm gonna let it shine, whispered from his lips, then silence. So what story do you tell yourself? This is my story and how it's changed over time and has evolved. So for the longest time, I searched for a way to honor my creative self and eventually in my professional life. So each job has led me to what my story is now currently, because it definitely has changed. Initially, it was a struggle finding some way to hold on to my creative self and doing what was expected of me. So like the child in the poem, the message from my parents were, you can be whatever you want to be. Do what you want to do. Be happy. But that conflicted with, don't you dare embarrass the family. And on top of that, layered on top of that was the messages from my external world, the community I was in, the college community that I was in. And it was all about, you need to have a worthy profession. You need a profession that makes money. So over the years, I've developed my own story. And at this point in my life, my definition of creativity now is more expansive and includes looking at circumstances from different perspectives and problem solving stuff in multiple solutions beyond what might be expected. And it's all about taking risks and play. So I'm gonna go through my journey and how I've developed that. So my first job after graduation was really not what I was looking for, because I wanted to get into something more creative. But all these messages that I mentioned earlier were playing in my mind and I was conflicted. So I put a pause on pursuing any kind of creative career. But in retrospect, it was the beginning of an interesting journey as I developed my story. So imagine this. So slippers. So I had slippers, which are flip-flops. That's what slippers are, what's called in Hawaii. So I had slippers, shorts, and shirt. I walked into this office ready for an interview. Yes, an interview. Walked into this glass-covered office and I could feel these eyes on me from outside, suspicious of why I was there and what I was doing. Well, I got that job and that was the beginning of a different experience, and it changed my view of what the work environment was like. Because I thought it was all about being in a corporation and basically wearing a shirt, a jacket, and a tie, basically. But that changed everything. I also learned from my boss, who was, I think some of you guys remember her. Her name is Kathy Lindstrom, and she was the assistant registrar. So she encouraged me to basically look at what I was doing in that office and then allowed me to change things so that it fit who I was and what I wanted to do. So I did that for a while. I definitely did well organizing things. I enjoyed doing that. And I think this was the first time I pivoted. And so pivot is, I know, a new word for professional development, but that was the first time I could pivot and make the job what I wanted it to be. So eventually I outgrew that job, and because that old message was about promotion, getting more money, etc., I found another job, and that was in what was called the Division of Honors. So that's way back when, years ago, when honors was actually their separate division. So I became the director of the high school scholars program, which meant more responsibilities. It included admitting students to UCLA and as well as advising them. So every year I had a small cohort of about 10 high school students that I would advise and talk to them about what goals they had, etc. And this is where I rediscovered that I enjoyed working with students. I was proud of being able to admit students without really looking at their SATs. I looked at how they performed in high school as well as their experiences. And that made me remember when I was in college where I worked with students, tutoring them at a middle school in Midtown LA. And then it also reminded me about the joy that I would have helping fellow students in the different organizations I was in. So that was the first time that I discovered that I could incorporate what I enjoyed into what I was doing. And so that included actually doing publications for the division. So initially I was not responsible for it, but then I convinced my boss at that point to get me into publications because I enjoyed designing things. So that's what I did. That was now part of my job. So that was another pivot basically in my job where I made the job fit who I was. And then the other thing I did too in response to what was happening back then was a budget crisis and also students looking for community. So I created the Honors Programs Volunteers where students would help us out in different aspects in the office as well as build a community. So once again, I pivoted in my position, creating a job where it incorporated what I was interested in. Of course, those messages were still coming in. And so I eventually applied for the manager position, which just opened up. So this is the manager of administrative services. And since I did well at organizing things, I got the job. But what was missing was basically working with students, because I didn't work with students. I worked with faculty and other administrators. But what was happening then in that job was that I was feeling almost like, I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you have sort of pain in your chest and you're feeling anxiety all the time. And so I had to really, really think about what I really wanted. I felt stuck. And so I would ruminate about it night and day about what I needed to do. And so what happened was that I took the biggest risk of my life, despite all these internal messages about making more money, etc. So I was required to quit my job because I was accepted to the master's program in counseling at CSUN. So I took that risk and quit my job and started that program. And that was excellent because it fit who I was as a person. But then what happened was I graduated from that and discovered that I wanted to work with a different type of client. And so I returned to UCLA and I got a temp position in honors. And I eventually convinced them to create a position for me where it was half administration and half counseling. So eventually I became a full-time counselor once a position opened up. And within that position, I created another program, which was called the Honors Fellows Leadership Program, where the students would create a community within honors. It also gave me the opportunity to express a lot of my creativity. And also, I mentioned earlier about play and taking risks. So I did a lot of that within that group to develop the group. So each experience and position has contributed to who I am and the story I now tell myself. And I think my experiences now color how I work with students. And I truly believe that they can be resilient and they have their own internal resources to determine what they need and want. And my role is to help them on their journey to discover this through similar powerful questions I ask myself. So to conclude this, I'm going to read another poem and then my last comments. Create epiphanies, stepping onto that line, heart pounding vertigo, allowing yourself to fly, may bring the imagined lift of the wind into the sunrise, calling from the horizon. The devil lurks behind, whispering, this little light of mine brings comfort. An internal war of living in the light or in the comfort of the familiar shadows. Choose, you must, and let go. So, what is your story? What is your narrative? Through my life journey, I finally realized that I can write my own story, honor my own values in everything I do. I've decided that my journey is an adventure to discover myself, what I can do to help inspire others, how great life is, and what it has to offer. Mahalo nui loa, and thank you.